All right, and we're live. Lily, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ariel. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's Zoom event of our UN Global Policy Dialogue on Gender Equality. And welcome everyone from Facebook Live and from the globe. Thank you so much for your support and your participation in today's event. And I am Yingqian Chen. You can also call me Lily. I am a United Nations journalist from Hong Kong Phoenix TV, and I'm based in New York. So our today's event will be 90 minutes long from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. And it is also a part of the monthly Global Policy Dialogue series coordinated by the UN Department of Economics and Social Affairs. So this event will be talking about the progress towards gender equality from the Beijing Declaration to the COVID-19 and beyond. It will be focused on data and policy. It will use its data based on the recent UN report, the World's Women 2020 Trends and Statistics. You can find the report details online on the UN DESA's website. And our today's event will have its English captions here just in the Zoom. You can click on the captioning icon on the bottom of the screen. You will see it. And also you will have the French and Spanish live captions, which is available on a separate website. You can click on the Text24 website link, which will be posted in the Zoom chat box. And then you can click on the drop-down menu to just select the language that you want. So our event will be also archived on the UN DESA Facebook page. So if you want to rewatch, you want to like just forward it, get a reply anytime you just go to the UN DESA Facebook, you can watch or download it just after the event is finished. So today we have plenty of very, very good experienced panelists today from around the globe, but our time is a little bit limited. So it would be really great if all the panelists can just keep their answers, remarks concise within 3 minutes. I would also ask all of the panelists to keep their microphone on mute until it's your turn to answer the question. Now, well, let's welcome two special guests for our today's event to deliver the opening remarks. I would first like to introduce Ms. Naole Valiji, the Senior Gender Advisor of the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General. So, Mr. Valiji, please take your time to the remarks.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, Lily. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's great to be here, and I can see all of the comments coming in from the chat, colleagues welcoming everyone from Nigeria, Burundi, Egypt, Costa Rica. It's wonderful to see the incredible turnout that you have here today. Let me first begin by commending DESA for holding this global data and policy meeting, and for the release of their recent flagship report, the World's Women 2020 Trends and Statistics. This report was issued in 2020 as we commemorate 25 years of Beijing and the Platform for Action on Gender Equality. And indeed, what was intended to be a milestone year this year for gender equality, in fact, today we risk losing the fragile gains of the last decades, including potentially a generation of gains made on women's labor force participation, increased levels of gender-based violence, and reinforced notions of traditional gender roles as unpaid care work has skyrocketed during this pandemic. And all of this matters not just to half of humanity or to one of our SDG goals. It is the cornerstone of them all, the point on which we can drive forward implementation or flounder through our inability to see the whole picture. And that to me is the real issue here, the ability to see the whole picture. None of us would want a map, or I should say these days, a Google map or Waze map that shows you only the area around where you are and not the bigger picture. Incomplete or data that fails to disaggregate or pay attention to where women are is just this, an incomplete picture that won't get us where we want to go, and in fact risks taking us in the wrong direction entirely. One of my favorite books of 2020 has been Invisible Women. And I know that I'm preaching to the converted here and that all of you do this on a daily basis and are well aware of these issues. But it was interesting to me to see how this book has hit one of the top-selling books of 2020 and has managed to translate this issue into a broader audience. In fact, we invited the author here earlier this year to brief UN senior leadership in a day-long retreat on gender equality. And it was incredible to see the way in which, when we make clear the impact and evidence of a failure to gender disaggregate our data and the outcomes of that, the way in which a light goes on for so many people about the way in which we operate. But I would challenge us to say that this is not just about statistics and data. It really is about what it is that we do with that information. One of the statistics we have heard for so many months during this pandemic is that 70% of our frontline healthcare workers are women. And yet, what is it that we do with that statistic? Our PPE is not created for women. It is created for, as we say, the standard issue man. And as a result of that, it ill-fits women who are increasingly exposed to the virus and more vulnerable as a result. So data needs quality analysis. It also requires diversity in our leadership to enact the policies that match the diversity of our world and can act on the full spectrum of information that we have. And I think that's the third piece. And I would really encourage us to be looking at what it is that we do with the data that then translates into the policy actions and outcomes that we need. And this is critically important in this moment, not just because we are in a crisis, but because we are in fact at a reflection point and an inflection point, an opportunity to emerge from this crisis differently. Let me just end by noting that later this morning, the Secretary General will be hosting the third in a series of roundtables that he's been holding with eminent economists. The first roundtable was with eminent women economists to talk about issues of debt, trade, external finance. The second was with young women economists to talk about issues of climate action and jobs. This morning, we will now convene a gender-balanced panel of eminent economists to bring these issues back to the table and talk about the actions and the way forward. I mention this to you because it is so important that we are bringing diversity of voices and perspectives to the table to have strength and outcomes. And this starts with the information, trends, and analysis that we pay attention to. Without it, we will simply be driving in the wrong direction. Let me conclude here and again commend you all for meeting today and to DESA for its comprehensive and critically important report. I wish you all the best for your discussions this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Valji. Thank you so much for your speech and insights. And now I would like to invite our next special guest to address the remarks from Ms. Sarah Hendricks. And she is the Director of the Policy of Program and Intergovernmental Division of the UN Women. So Ms. Hendricks, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to colleagues, friends, and distinguished guests from all over the world. Thank you indeed to UN DESA for hosting this meeting and for the launch of this critical data report on gender. I'm delighted to be part of today's important global dialogue on progress towards gender equality from the Beijing Declaration to COVID-19 and beyond. And certainly, as Nala highlighted, 2020 was intended to mark an important milestone, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. And while we have seen progress in some areas, numerous challenges persist, and really much remains to be done for the Beijing promise to become reality. And as many parts of the globe enter into yet another wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is critical that we pay attention to its impact on women and girls and how the response is specifically addressing their unique needs and priorities. Over the last number of months, we have documented how COVID-19 threatens to undo many of the gains on gender equality over the past 25 years. Women's economic security is in jeopardy. Women and girls are shouldering an increased burden of unpaid care and domestic workload. And gender-based violence is increasingly resurgent, whilst girls' education and maternal health are likewise threatened. The economic fallout alone, including loss of jobs and livelihood, is expected to push millions of additional people into extreme poverty, with women and girls being the hardest hit. Data that UN Women have collected recently, together with UNDP, on government policy responses, shows that many governments are making tremendous efforts in some areas. And yet, when we dig down, some of these efforts are not addressing critical issues, such as women's economic security or unpaid care work. In fact, only 17% of all the social protection and labor market measures tracked in response to COVID-19 can justifiably be cited as being gender intentional. However, there is also some important light. While the challenges are daunting, they are surmountable. The same data shows us that many countries are introducing bold policies to address gender equality concerns in the areas specifically of gender-based violence. For example, 135 countries have introduced more than 700 policy measures on gender-based violence, which is a heartening response to the UN Secretary General's call to action on gender-based violence in the context of COVID-19. I think political engagement, a strong commitment to data and evidence, as well as financing in support of gender equality are essential to ensure that we can actually accelerate progress. As Nala highlighted in the book on Invisible Women this year, without good gender data and quality gender data analysis, inequalities can simply become invisibilized. And therefore, the World's Women 2020, today's report and this data and policy dialogue are timely to contribute to our common agenda to achieve gender equality around the world. I really look forward to the discussion, to the perspectives that will be highlighted, to the ideas that will be amplified on the way forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hendricks. Thank you so much for your excellent remarks. And now we will move to our first discussion panel on women's health and economic empowerment in the new normal, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. During this discussion, we will have 4 experts around the world sharing their research results, policies, analysis with us on women's health and on economic empowerment. We will focus on both the past, now, and also the future. So this discussion will be about 40 minutes. I will ask each of the panelists to first briefly tell us about the work you are working on right now, like in 2 minutes, and then I will ask each of you 1 question for the first round. And after the first round, I will ask the second question, like for each of you as the second round. So this is for the first 30 minutes. And after that, we will move on to the Q&A section for about the remaining 10 minutes if the time permits. So I would ask the speakers to keep your answer concise to about like 3 minutes for each of the question because the time is limited. So if any of the panelists wants to jump in, just raise your hand at any time and our organizer will just unmute your mic. So I would first like to introduce as Miss Francesca Graham. She is the chief of the Social and Gender Statistics section from UN DESA, and she is also the leading author of the World's Women 2020 report, The Trends and Statistics. So first, Miss Francesca, would you like to introduce about your UN report and the main focus and findings inside the report?
Yes, thank you so much, Lily, and greetings to everyone from New York. Maybe just a few words about the latest edition of the World's Women 2020. This is a report that we have prepared, the UN Statistics Division of DESA, since 1990 to present the latest data and the status of women compared to men and the latest assessment of progress toward gender equality. This year, this edition is quite innovative compared to past editions. First, we have moved away from the traditional publication and we have unpacked the wealth of information under the traditional gender concerns of population, work, education, violence against women, policy, women in positions of policies and decision making. We have unpacked the publication into 100 short gender stories, all based on latest available data and very visual to improve the way we communicate and we disseminate the information. Something that is also new compared to the past is that we have partnered with experts from around the world, including 14 member states that have written their own stories about gender equality in their countries. And I believe that this has been a strategic decision because moving away from the global level and the regional level and really zooming in into the country level, they have brought this wealth of information that is much more granular and that has helped us in highlighting intersecting inequalities and overlapping challenges and obstacles faced by many women, subgroups of women, women with disabilities, indigenous women, older women, women living in rural areas. And this type of data is not available at the global level or for all countries. And finally, we have reviewed around 200 indicators. So it's a massive amount of information. And for the first time, this information, these data sets are all available geocoded. And that will also help us in improving the way we present the data, the way we communicate the data, and hopefully we will be able to reach out to the general public and also improve the dialogue that we are having this morning with our policy experts and policymakers. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you, Ms. Francesca Garam. And I would like to have a follow-up question on the report. Can you give us some global overview of the gender equality situation right now? What's the main problem? What's the challenges? Can you share with us some data?
Sure. So I would say that very much in line with the intervention from Sarah from UN Women, what we see is that there is definitely been significant progress on many of the 200 plus indicators that we have assessed over the last 2 decades. For instance, education is a big success. We have achieved gender parity in primary and secondary education. I'm talking about global level. At the moment we move away from the global and we look at the regional findings, and from the regional we move into the national findings. Of course, there are wide variations, but just to give you an overview at the global level, education is a success story. Primary, secondary, girls and boys are performing very well and in very similar levels. At tertiary level, so a university level, we actually see that girls are overtaking, they are participating more than young men. Also in the chapter of population and families, we see that women are marrying later, are having less children. They are, from that perspective, more empowered. However, when we move into the chapter on work, paid work, we see stagnation. So over the last 25 years, women's participation in the labor force, that's one of the macro indicators that we are monitoring, has remained at around 50% compared to 75% of participation for men. Also in terms of conditions at work, in terms of concentration in certain subsector of the economies, we see that there has been some sort of stagnation. When we talk about unpaid work, moving from paid to unpaid work, we can confirm that women are still doing the bulk of these unpaid provisions of care and domestic chores at home, doing almost 3 times as much as men, spending 3 times as much time on these activities as men. And we know that this is one of the main causes one of the explanatory factors behind their lack of participation in paid work, in the labor force participation. And then finally, just quickly, we also see that in terms of power and decision-making positions, there has been progress, sometimes significant. They have doubled their participation among parliamentarians. They have tripled their participation among ministers, but they started from a level that was so low that even if we had a significant improvement, we are still very far from the 30% gender quota and very far from the 50% level of parity. Violence against women is still a global issue. I believe Sarah mentioned it, and we definitely need to accelerate efforts to address that, particularly during the COVID pandemic. And we also see some new elements of distress for older women. There is an increase of the proportion of older women living alone, and that's a challenge because they are at higher risk of poverty, and we have a nice few stories about this in the World's Women 2020, and there is also an increase in lone mothers. So these are women living alone with children. There's been an increase all over developing countries, developed countries alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca. Thank you so much for your excellent overview from the globe. Help us to understand the situation right now. So the second panelist, I would try to introduce Ms. Martha Chen. Martha Chen is the lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, and also she is the founder and senior advisor of the Global Research Policy Action Network, Women in Informal Employment, Globalizing and Organizing. So Ms. Chen, thank you so much for coming to the panel, and would you like to use 2 minutes to briefly introduce what you have been working on and what's your main findings recently?
Thank you so much, Lily, and thank you to UN DESA. I'd be pleased to, I think what I'll do is speak more to WeGo's perspective on a set of issues that this panel and the whole dialogue is grappling with, which are the new normal, the future normal, data and policy and gender equity. So to bring the perspective of WeGo, which works with the working poor, especially women in the informal economy, and seeks to empower the working poor to change the policy and regulatory environment. So just our perspective on these issues. First, the new normal. There's no doubt the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions associated with it have had a major impact on the informal workforce, both women and men. And the ILO estimated in April, I think it was, that 80% of the informal workforce globally, which is 1.6 billion workers, would have their livelihoods destroyed. And we have seen this. WeGo has carried out a 12-city study around the world at 3 points in time, pre-COVID, April and June. And the evidence is clear that these workers, the informal workers in all 12 cities, saw a sudden loss of work and a sudden severe decline in income. They had limited, unequal access to the relief measures. And in order to cope, they had to deplete their resources, drew down savings, sold pawned assets, and went further into debt. In terms of the future normal, we can see 3 scenarios, possible scenarios for the working poor in the informal economy. One is the bad old deal, that we return to the old normal, which stigmatized and penalized informal workers as somehow illegal, criminal, or non-productive, when most of them are working poor trying to earn an honest living. There is real likelihood of a worse new deal, of reversals of the gains made by informal workers due to their being somehow scapegoated as vectors of the virus and or a drag on economic recovery. And there's signs of this in new laws and regulations around the world. But of course, what we're struggling for is a better New Deal, and we hope any new social contract or any new global deal will embrace informal workers, will protect them and promote their livelihoods. In terms of data and policy, we all know that policymakers, especially economic policymakers, rely on data to make their policy decisions. And when they don't have the data, they use proxy indicators of all kinds, sometimes quite crazy, I would add. We also are happy to say that there's been a lot of improvement on data on informal employment over the past 2 decades. And thanks in large part to a unique collaboration, I might say, between ILO and WeGo and other organizations of informal workers as informed users working with producers of data. And we believe very strongly in what Ila Bhatt, the founder of SEWA, has said, and she was also the co-founder of WeGo, which is data in the hands of workers is power. And if they can have this data, they can use the data on their numbers, on their contributions to effectively negotiate with government, employers, and other key stakeholders. And finally, a point on gender equity from our perspective. Going forward, as my remarks have suggested, efforts to promote gender equality need to adopt an intersectional approach. We need to understand and address the disadvantages that women face by reason of what they do. Are they formal or informal workers? By where they live. Do they live in gated communities or informal settlements? And by who they are. And who they are is not just as women, but for many women around the world as members of disadvantaged communities. And I'll end with just an example. Consider a Black migrant female domestic worker. She faces greater disadvantages than a white non-migrant female domestic worker by reason of her race and her migrant status. So we really have to put intersectionality more front and central in our gender analysis and our efforts to promote gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chen, for your overview. We know that, as you just mentioned, the pandemic has hit the world a lot and hit almost every region. So to your understanding and your research on informal workers, like which part of the world has been hit most for the informal workers? And also before the pandemic, do you see there has been already making some progress on these workers for their situation?
Well, thank you for those 2 questions. In terms of differences around the world, we see differences, but we don't see differences. We have a sector lens on informal employment, so we look at specific groups. And what we find for specific groups is very similar problems around the world, right? Now, what happens is that countries differ by their sort of mix of virus response and lockdowns and restrictions. And that mix has implications for the work, because if the lockdown is very strong and very prolonged, their ability to work, they can't work remotely from home, sorry. They have to get out and about, or they have to receive work orders if they're home-based workers. So they very much rely on mobility, physical mobility, and the functioning of it's not like the rest of us who can be on Zoom and continue to work very easily. And in terms of progress pre-COVID, there were a lot of gains. The WeGo network is part social movement, so there's a global movement of informal worker organizations. And there have been several victories in the whole system of the UN. We have 2 ILO conventions on specific groups of informal workers, home workers and domestic workers. The ILO recommendation 204 on formalization of informal workers has many provisions that are quite progressive for the workers and need to be honored. And in the Habitat 3 Summit document, there was recognition of urban informal workers. So I'm sure I've missed some of the global commitments, but there has been real progress made. And that's why we're really concerned about the worse New Deal going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Chen, and we will come back to your discussion later on. And our third guest is Ms. Naole Tomei. She is the Director of the Conditions of Work and Equality Department from International Labour Organization. Ms. Tomei is presently leading works in inequalities and the world of work for discussion at the next session of the International Labour Conferences. So thank you, Ms. Tomei, for coming here for the event. And would you like to take 2 minutes to briefly let us know what you've been working on recently?
Thank you very much, Lily. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, UNDESA, for inviting the ILO to this very important forum. I would like to say from the onset that the ILO has been very much involved in these past months in trying to measure what has been the impact of the pandemic in the world of work, including, of course, women workers. And I think the projections that we have are in terms of job losses that will result from the pandemic by the end of this biennium, by this year, will be quite major. We were estimating about a loss of 140 million jobs by the end of the year. But if the second wave intensifies, the number of job losses will amount to 340 million of full-time jobs. Now, when we are talking of the loss of jobs, a large amount of these job losses will unfortunately concern women. And this is due to the fact that women are overrepresented, are concentrated. 40% of employed women are indeed working in those sectors that are being hit the most by the pandemic. I'm talking of accommodation, I'm referring to food services, I'm referring to hospitality and manufacturing as well. In many sub-regions, manufacturing in the garment and leather industry has been a major employer of women and provided also formal jobs for women in developing countries. But I would like to spend a few words about two initiatives that we have been taking in relation to both the informal economy, women workers or workers more generally, as well as teleworking. And let me start with teleworking. As you know, overnight, millions of people, women and men, have shifted to mandatory teleworking. And while those who have managed to do so are to be considered privileged, because indeed they have managed to continue to work, to earn an income, while, without suffering from confinement measures with regard to their ability to work, there have been a number of new challenges that have emerged. Challenges that have been particularly marked for women. There has been already a reference to the issue of the increase in domestic violence, where home has become the workplace. It has become very obvious that home is not necessarily a safe workplace, because indeed in a number of countries there has been an increase in the incidence of domestic violence, also for women who were undertaking teleworking. And the other issue is very much relating to mental health problems that result also from the fact of combining paid work and an increased amount of family responsibilities and caregiving duties at home. So homes have become workplaces, have become playgrounds for kids, and both women and men, but more so for women, have become teachers, have become caregivers, and have continued to work for paid employment. So I mean, this is raising a number of new issues in the whole field of occupational safety and health and mental health. This is one of the main sources of problems for workers in the new normal. And we have been trying to come up with a number of measures with a view to dealing with this issue. With regard to the informal economy, and I will conclude because Martha has already alluded to also to the joint work that we have carried out in this particular field, what I would like to highlight is how the ILO has tried to bring together the data producers with the policymakers during times of the pandemic with a view to addressing the most urgent situations and problems facing workers in the formal economy through the conduction of rapid assessments of the impact of COVID-19 in the informal economy. And we have had, I mean, the main purpose of these assessments is indeed to try to determine which are the different sectors within the broader informal economy and which categories of workers, including home workers, domestic workers, unpaid family laborers, who are amongst the most vulnerable segments of the informal economy, how they are faring during the pandemic. What are their specific constraints? What would indeed help in terms of making a difference? Which type of measures could be taken at the local level, by which type of agency, as well as trade unions and employers organizations. Indeed, there have been a number of employers organizations, for instance, that have been extending support services to workers in the informal economy. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tomei. And my next question will be a follow-up on your introduction. You mentioned that unpaid workers and women that are working inside the house doing caring and domestic works, how do these works have been affected during the pandemic? And you mentioned there's some constraints. What are the constraints and how can we improve their situation?
Well, as I was telling you, we have the pandemic is impacting significantly and disproportionately, I would say, on women. And from the preliminary data of household surveys that have been conducted in a few countries around the world, we actually have noticed that there has been a dramatic decline in the employment rate of women who are employed in the informal economy, and women who have children. So when you are comparing the loss or the decline in employment rate of women with children, small children, versus women without children who are also working in the formal economy, the loss, or the decline in employment rate has been much more pronounced for women with family responsibilities. So I mean, in the new normal, we will need to deal with the issue of how to reduce the drudgery of unpaid care work. I mean, this was an issue during the pre-COVID times. I think that family responsibility as well as domestic chores are amongst one of the main obstacles very often towards women remaining in paid employment and progressing in labor markets. And we have noticed also that because of the confinement measures, women have become teachers, providers of care services to elderly parents, and engage in paid employment. So this means that we need to put in place in the future, we need to invest in the care economy in the future. I mean, this was something that was already very badly needed before the outbreak of the pandemic. I think the pandemic has absolutely made apparent the need for improving the provision of childcare services, both in rich countries as well as in emerging economies. And at the same time, trying to see how to combine policies relating to leave, family leave, parental leave, paternity leave, with indeed provision of services by the state. I think this will be one of the main challenges and tasks that we will have to deal with on an urgent basis in the coming months.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Tomei. And now we will have our fourth guest, Ms. Jayanti Ghoshi from India. And she is the professor of economics at the Center of Economics Studies and Planning from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She is also the member of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs. So, Ms. Ghoshi, would you like to take 2 minutes to briefly inform us what you've been working on these days? Oh, Ms. Ghoshi, would you like to unmute your mic?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Thank you so
Good.
much. It's a real pleasure to follow after these excellent interventions, because I can actually reduce what I had to say. I think it's already been said, the pandemic has really exposed existing fault lines, has accentuated them, and has clearly set back the progress that was being made, that was mentioned earlier, the significant progress in areas like education and some others over the past 25 years. I would like to identify 7 broad challenges, I think, that have been really brought out and have become more severe during this period of the pandemic. The first one, I think both Martha and Manuela have talked about very well, is the issue of women workers, the informal workers, the unpaid workers, the formal workers in jobs who are forced to leave because of childcare and other responsibilities. That's already been talked about. I won't mention it. I think the second one is also very important, specifically health workers. The pandemic was supposed to make societies appreciate the importance of care work. In fact, we haven't seen that. There's been a bit of lip service, there have been people clapping and so on, but we really have not seen society valuing, remunerating, rewarding care work. We have seen, in fact, the opposite. We've seen lack of protection during the pandemic when they're at the front lines. We have seen inadequate pay and sometimes delayed payments, and we've seen job losses as well for many health workers. The third area is violence against women. I think this has been talked about elsewhere quite a bit. During the lockdowns in many countries, we saw that there was significant increase, often less recorded, of violence against women. And there is no evidence that this is getting any better as lockdowns get reduced, because the livelihood conditions and the material conditions of most people are so much worse that they tend to take their frustrations out within the homes. The fourth concern is that of the other health issues that plague women. And we know that, for example, reproductive health has been significantly affected. In India, during the period of the lockdown, there were 40% less institutional deliveries, that is, childbirths in hospitals. And so we know that this is going to affect infant mortality, maternal mortality. We know that other diseases are being neglected, whether it is tuberculosis, it's long-term cancer, a whole range of other things. And we know that when medical services get strained, women tend disproportionately to lose out. So that's the other concern. Food security is something that isn't sufficiently talked about. Across the world, in the developing world, we have seen major livelihood losses, and this has affected the ability of families to access food. And this has really meant many, many more women and girls going hungry. We also know within households, when there's a shortage of food, that women and girls tend to get less. And this has really been quite severe. I know in my own country, India, this is a serious problem, but it's not the only one. There are really major problems of aggregate food insecurity and denial of food access, much less food access for women and girls. And then there's education, which was this big success, as was mentioned earlier. the pandemic, the closures, the lockdowns, the difficulties of accessing have accentuated not just the digital divide, but the fact that less and less families are inclined to put resources into educating girls at a time like this. And I think that's a serious concern. Again, the final thing would be that, you know, this is, or maybe that's the eighth, I don't know if it was 7 or 8 now, but would be that, you know, the inadequacies of earlier forms of mobilization in a period when there are so many constraints on mobility, on public engagement, and when everything happens online. It really excludes very large numbers of women in particular. And we really have to think of not just how the digital divide is adding to inequalities in work, in education, and even in healthcare, but also how this digital divide is affecting possibilities of mobilization. I know that this would be something that would concern Martha, for example, and Manuela as well. So finally, then what does all this mean? I think there are 2 major things that we have to grapple with. How do we prevent these current forces, which are all negative, let's admit it, they're all negative. How do we prevent them from determining a future medium-term trend? In other words, how do we stop this bad New Deal that Martha mentioned? And how do we deal with this along with the climate change challenge, which is not in the future, it is happening. There are climate refugees as we speak. And again, we know women are disproportionately affected by both climate and environmental concerns and disasters. So I think we have a very large and immense task, a major policy task, and we can't treat this as just extensions of our previous work. We have to fundamentally change the level, the extent, and the methods in which we work if we really want to move towards a better future for women.
Thank you, Ms. Goshi. Thank you for your introduction. And we would like to hear more about your country perspective from India. We know that India has the world's 2nd largest population, about 1.3 billion. And now India is also suffered from very severe COVID-19 pandemic. What's the women's general situation in India? And do you think women there are more easily to be affected by coronavirus? What's the biggest concern in your country over gender equality?
Well, India was never a particularly shining example of either gender equality or gender empowerment, but things have got significantly worse. All of the fault lines that I have mentioned are extremely exaggerated in India. So disproportionately, women have lost jobs in the formal sector. Most women, 98% of the women workers are informal. Many of them, about at least half, lost livelihoods, some completely and some to such a major degree that it's really like no livelihood. There's been significant increase in violence against women. There have been major concerns about health. There have been real concerns also about education, and food security is a very, very big one because we have a vast increase in the numbers of hungry people. There's been inadequate public distribution of food at a time when it is desperately needed. And the livelihood concerns have really meant that all of these bread and butter issues have become extremely dominant. So the condition of women in India, I would say, has been massively adversely affected by the pandemic. And what is worse is that at the moment, public policy seems to either be ignoring it, suppressing it, or directly moving against those who protest about these.
Thank you, Mr. Goshi. Thank you so much for our panelists. And because the time is limited, so we will just move to our Q&A section. Right now, we have already received a lot of questions from our audience, both from Facebook and both from our Zoom room. So the first question is from Fatuma Nanjiza from Rwanda. And she's asking, what is the link between reporting mechanism of Beijing Platform for Action and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women? Also, we have a question from one of our participants in the Zoom room, from Fatuma, and who is asking, is there any lessons we have learned from the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration? So I would ask if any of the panelists would like to answer this question, you can just raise your hand and unmute your microphone. Francesca or Martha Chen, would you like to talk a little bit about this question?
Sure. Being the statistician in the panel, of course, I would like to address the questions from the data point of view and the statistical capacity of countries to produce the data that are needed to inform all the important issues that have been discussed so far by Marta, by Manuela, by Yahati, and also the data that are needed to address the issues and respond promptly. I would say that despite the fact that we have compiled a huge quantity of information to produce the World's Women 2020, as I said, we put together more than 200 indicators and 200 data sets. We realized that many of the issues lack information. Particularly when we move from the global level and we try to further disaggregate and come up with more granular information. Just to give you an idea, when we talk about the gender pay gap, we only have information for around 60 countries. When we look at asset ownership, that's another important dimension behind women's economic empowerment, the topic of our dialogue today. We have information for around 15 countries when we talk about land ownership. When we talk about mobile phone ownership, we only have information for 80 countries. So that's very far from having information for the full member states and for the full 200 and plus countries and territories in the world. When we talk about unpaid work, we've been discussing a lot about unpaid care, unpaid domestic work. We still, after 25 years, we still only have information for 89 countries. So to really be able to grasp and understand the gender differences and the way this unpaid work is distributed within the couple, we really need to invest on time use surveys and improve the information base that will inform the required policies. And you also, yes, when we talk about COVID and the impact of COVID, not just from the health perspective, but also in terms of social and economic impact, we need to have data that are further disaggregated, not just by sex, by age. We also need additional information on household composition, household type, if we are seriously looking at coming up with gender relevant analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. And I will move to our second question. We just received it from the Facebook feed. It's about domestic work. So the question is from Kenhaya. The question is, unless the domestic work isn't accounted into the GDP, the gender disparity between men and women will not be eliminated, or at least lessened. What do you think about that? So Ms. Tomei, would you like to address on this question about domestic works?
Yes, thank you. Well, there are two issues here, right? One is the unpaid domestic work that indeed Francesca was alluding to earlier on. I think that besides data that can be collected through the time use surveys, in the ILO we have been trying to develop also some alternative methods with a view to gathering this information on a more regular basis without waiting for time surveys that are usually conducted every 5 or 10 years, and to indeed associate modules that are based on diary method to household surveys or labor force surveys that are carried out more frequently in the course of a year by quite a number of countries. This would be another way of indeed getting a better sense of what is the magnitude of unpaid care work which has been recognized, by the way, as work by the International Conference of Labor Statisticians back in 2013, which means, therefore, that indeed this work is counted as, is contributing to the creation of the economic and social wealth of a country. So this has been really revolutionary because it has expanded the boundaries of work and making visible the contribution of women who work very hard without pay for their families and their households. The issue on domestic work, that's a very important domestic work, which is work carried out for other households and for pay. It's another very, very important topic. In Latin America, for instance, domestic work is the most important source of employment for women. And it's another very important source of employment for women everywhere else. So there have been, again, a number of attempts to try indeed to capture statistically domestic work. It's not always very obvious because in a number of countries, particularly in Asian countries, domestic work is not regarded as work. And therefore, this makes indeed, but you know, it's services that are being provided through a commercial contract, and therefore they really escape very often the ability of capturing fully the actual size and magnitude, and therefore contribution of domestic workers to societies.
Thank you so much, Ms. Tomei. And we have the next question from Cherry Crystal Valley from New York, USA. The question is about the pay gap between men and women. So we know that there's a serious gap in terms of the payment between men and women, and what can we do? And how can we help to eliminate the pay gap? So Ms. Masa Chen, would you like to address this question? And also, would you like to share with us any source of available data that people can just find, like our audience, they can find online when they want to know the data, like website or anything as well?
I can only partially answer the question. I begin by saying that nearly half of all workers are self-employed. So the whole issue of pay, in a sense, is for the other half, and for the self-employed, it's a more complicated issue of how you measure the earnings, because you have to get into gross and net, and there are multiple factors that affect the earnings of women and men. Again, the ILO and Francesca and others are all trying to measure both, which is the pay gap if you've got a wage employment, and the earnings gap, if you will, if you are self-employed. The other thing we know I can speak on the self-employed, is that there are three broad groups. They're employers, and then what's called own account, which are people who work on their own or in a small family unit, and the contributing family workers in the family unit. And what we know globally is that very few of the self-employed are actually employers, and men are more likely to be employers than women. And among the self-employed, the one group that on average will earn, above the minimum wage, let's say, are employers. And many of the own account workers earn on average about what employees would earn, right? So we are getting at the problem within the self-employment, but I would turn to Francesca or to Manuela on the sources of data on pay gaps in wage employment.
Ms. Tomei, would you like to add 1 or 2 minutes to this question? And then we will need to wrap up for this discussion.
Yes, sure.
Oh.
You're muted, Manuela.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. As Marta said, and this is the case in a number of regions, women are essentially engaged in own account work, self-employed, and hence issues relating to wages are not that relevant. And this raises a number of challenges in terms of indeed how to calculate, how to measure the gender gap in incomes that stem from labor, from work. But with regard to the gender gap in terms of earnings of wages, we at the ILO produce every second year a global wage report that provides data on trends with regard to wages, distribution of wages across different groups, gender inequalities in respect of remuneration. And what we did in the last edition about 1.5 years ago, we tried indeed to deal with a very complex issue of identifying which type of indicator, when we are talking of the gender pay gap, is the most sensible from and most informative from a policy viewpoint. Because of course it will have, if we calculate, if we measure the gender gap in hourly earnings or the gender gap in monthly earnings, of course the result will be very different, and they will capture different issues that would therefore have different implications for policy. But what I think one of the findings that emerged in our last edition of the Global Wage Report was that the gender pay gap was largest in developing countries at the very bottom of the wage distribution compared to the gender gap at the top of the wages distribution, while the reverse was the case in rich countries. So I think this is an extremely interesting finding that again has very important policy implications, because for those who are concentrated at the bottom of the wage distribution in developing economies, perhaps sound minimum wages would indeed be very helpful in terms of lifting also many women outside working poverty. I know that Jayati has raised her hand.
Yeah. We will move to Jahat for your opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm finished.
Yeah. Jayati, Mr. Goshi, would you like to add something? I just saw your raise your hand.
Okay. Should I speak? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just want to take up what Manuela said. You know, this reinforces another finding that is there in the whole gender gap literature. Wherever there is more unpaid work of women, you get a higher gender wage gap. And that's really because if women are doing something for free, and more women are doing work for free, then all of the work that women do gets undervalued, which means that they get lower wages for what they do. The occupations in which they are concentrated are paid lower, and even the men who are involved in these activities are paid less. So there's a very strong association between the extent of unpaid work, which is necessarily more in poorer households, and the gender wage gap.
Thank you so much for the panelists that are coming for our first discussion. We have to move and wrap up for the second one. And thank you, Francesca, thank you, Martha, thank you, Jayati, and thank you, Manuela, for participating. And now we will move to our second discussion. In this section, we have 3 new guests, and this section will be about 20 minutes for the round. We will be talking about regional analysis and perspectives on progress towards gender equality since 1995. So our first guest I want to introduce is Ms. Anna Glacia. She is the Director of Division for Gender Affairs of the UN Regional Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean. So Anna, would you like to introduce your recent work, like within 2 minutes?
Thank you, Jingyang. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Buenos días from Latin America and Caribbean region. And we congratulate UN DESA for the new report, the World Women Report 2020, because include the national and regional approach and the concept of intersectionality that is so important. ECLAC, the Regional Commission, has an important role coordinating actions that contribute to economic and social development in Latin America and the Caribbean. And our primary contribution in the last decade has been put equality at the center of the development of the country region, highlighting gender equality. Gender equality and intersectionality is at the core of our role. We have working at the Regional Conference on Women in Latin America and the Caribbean since 1977, and we agree a regional gender agenda that is very comprehensive and contribute also to the Beijing process forward. And also the Statistical Conference of the Americas, it has been consolidated as appropriate forum for cooperation, and we convene a working group on gender statistics that is chaired by Mexico, and the gender division is the secretariat. And in this time, for instance, 19 countries has carried out time use surveys. Finally, in the COVID context, the Gender Equality Observatory for Latin America and the Caribbean has continued their role, but we are promote the COVID-19 Observatory, follow up the measures taken by the countries, and with a specific section on gender equality, with measures on gender-based violence, care economy, employment, income generation, social protection, and women's participation, and of course, gender-based violence. No? So this is a source of information, a public information that civil society, and particularly feminist organizations, can use to monitor governmental actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I have one follow-up question. Since you're from Latin America, we know Latin America has been hit by coronavirus a lot. What do you think the government can help to improve the Latin America region's women empowerment under the pandemic? And is there any successive story that you want to share? And is there any lessons that we should learn from this region?
Yes, I would like to put first that we are not talking about normality. We are talking about a transformative recovery, to use the COVID crisis and opportunity to both a transformative recovery, ability, gender equality at its core. And for that, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our region approved 3 weeks ago a political declaration that for a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery in Latin America and the Caribbean, highlighting the importance of developing recovery plans that could drive transformational change towards peaceful, just, and inclusive society, particularly with the participation of women. Some examples of good practice from our region is, for instance, the case of Uruguay, which has established an integrated national care system that began to be developed as a request of academia and civil society, and now is a national system with a law, institutionalized, and we are working with this system for the last 10 years. In the last year, in the context, for instance, of COVID, we are working with the Bogota, the capital of Colombia, that is developing also a care system to better respond to the pandemic situation, policing the care economy, that is a main message from our region to the global level. Care economy is in the core of gender equality future, no, or achievement, no. So For instance, we are working also with Argentina on that in developed care system. No? So care systems and diagnosis and georeferencing of indicators that we are working also with DESA on that. This is an important examples of our region. For instance, in the context of 25 Day to eliminate all forms of violence against women, we have a lot of measures developed for our countries. For instance, promoting services as essential services, putting more points of attention for women at the pharmacies or supermarkets and others. But of course, when we review the data, we are really worried because many challenges at the global level, but in this region that is so unequal for women's empowerment, putting at the center economic recovery, and as I mentioned, the transformational recovery, working together between producers of information and national women machinery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing with us. And our second guest is from Japan, Ms. Tomoko Hayashi, and she is a Director General from the Gender Equality Bureau Cabinet Office from Japan. And Ms. Hayashi joined the government as the economist in 1987 and focusing on economic research, forecasting, micro-policy making, etc. And Ms. Hayashi, would you like to use 2 minutes to address on what you have been working these days as the economist from Japan? What's your findings recently?
Thank you. I'm Tomoko Hayashi, Director General, Gender Equality Bureau Cabinet Office, directly under the Prime Minister of Japan. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm the head of the national machinery for promoting gender equality in Japan, reporting to the Prime Minister and the Minister for Gender Equality. The Beijing Declaration led to the setup of national machinery and the Basic Act for Gender Equal Society. Based on this act, the government formulates the 5-year basic plan for gender equality in every 5 years. The Basic Act also stipulates that we must directly advise the Prime Minister from time to time based on the experts' policy advice based on data. Regarding the impacts of the COVID-19, just same as other countries and regions, we have observed a major and disproportionate impact on women and girls in Japan. Recent striking data includes dramatic decline in female employment, in particular non-regular workers in service sector, which has led to poverty in single mothers, 20% increase in gender-based violence, 60% increase in domestic violence, and shockingly, 80% increase in women suicide. The Cabinet Office has launched a new task force to analyze these impacts of COVID-19, and last Saturday, just submitted the urgent requests to the Prime Minister and all the ministers to focus more on impacts of the COVID-19 on women and girls and their needs. The requests include further assistance for single mothers and strengthening efforts to mitigate the impacts on women and girls. It also includes paying utmost attention to the impacts of women and children when deciding to close schools and child care facilities. By maximizing the function as the national machinery for gender equality for women's empowerment, we will further reflect data analysis to our policy. I believe that we must aim to build back stronger and better for women's empowerment in the post-pandemic, not just to recover to the same level before the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hayashi. Can you also share us like 1 or 2 country-level success story from Japan, and what have been some defining factors that led to this success in Japan?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes. We have a lot of challenges. In particular, economic participation rate had been lower than other countries, but our recent country-level success stories reveals we have some success on that front. So the situation of women's economic participation has been improved. Women in employment has increased by over 3.3 million in these 7 years of Abenomics. The percentage of women in employment between the ages of 25 to 44 years old has significantly increased from 67.7% in 2012 to 77.7% in 2019. So 10% point increase in 7 years. And additionally, proportion of women in board members increased by 4 times from 630 in 2012 to 2,528 in 2020. And there are 2 forces. One, the act of the promotion of female participation and career advancement went into full effect in 2016. The act obligates companies to draw up action plans and disclose information relating to women's participation and advancement. Also, we have introduced a new public procurement system in which priority is given to the companies certified as promoting balance between work and family life. The second,
Thank you, Ms. Hayashi.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. Sorry, we have very limited time, and we would like to now invite to our third guest, who is Ms. Aurelia Spatara from who is the Deputy General Director of the National Bureau of Statistics of Moldova. And Ms. Spataru, you've been leading the work of data dissemination and statistical method for UNDP Moldova. So would you like to tell us about your work? And also my question is, what data do we have right now on gender equality? What method are we using? And do you find, is there any gender gaps right now that we need to fulfill?
Thank you, Lily. Hello to everyone. I'm happy to join you in this dialogue. And indeed, I am working at the National Bureau of Statistics for the last 1.5 years. But before then, I was activating for more than 12 years in the UN system, in particular in the UNDP, but also implementing a joint UN project for the strengthening of the national statistical system of Moldova. And during that period, we have succeeded to support very much of the National Bureau of Statistics as it regards the production and dissemination of gender statistics. And I am happy that our office has accepted the challenge of the UN DESA when being invited to participate in the development of this World's Women Report, our office being one of those 14 statistical offices who have contributed with the country stories. And the country story of the Republic of Moldova was in fact concentrated and focused on one of the critical topics, the economic, out of the sector or area on the economic empowerment, in particular relating to the social protection system and also old age pension system. why this topic has been selected by us, because my introduction would differ somehow from the previous discussants, because I am indeed the only one, I suppose, representing a Bureau of Statistics, an Institute of Statistics, and that's why I will speak from the perspective of a data producer, and in particular relating to this, to our contribution to the World's Women Report. Why we have selected the social protection topic in order to discuss within this World's Women Report. It is because the vulnerability of the population being covered by the social protection system and the financial instability and unsustainability of the protection system in the country, unfortunately. Why does it happen? For example, the social protection is accounting for 33% of the national public budget expenditures and 11% of the GDP, but also 64% of social protection expenditures were spent in particular on social protection for older people. And you know, the stability and the financial sustainability of this system is decreasing and weakening, also because of the demographic phenomena happening in the country, because we are unfortunately suffering from the aging of the population and from the depopulation, because we have very high emigration rates, and we are losing people, and in particular working age people who are emigrated to countries like Italy, Spain, or Russian Federation, looking for job, and unfortunately not returning back, but opposite, taking their families with them abroad and living there. So, and in this particular sector, I would like to mention that women are the most indeed vulnerable in comparison with men. Why? Because, you know, on one hand, women have a longer life expectancy, but on the other hand, their economic activity is shorter than of the men. And in this respect, because of the gender gap and the inequality, the lower incomes of women, they are retiring with lower social benefits and social protection allowances. And these put women in a longer period of risk to the poverty and to social exclusion and deprivation. And that is why all these factors combined are having very, very bad consequences and negative on the living standards and on the well-being of elderly women in particular. So that was the point, and I am thankful that my colleagues, my statisticians in our bureau have succeeded to showcase the Moldova's story. And I would welcome any question in this respect. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Spataru. Thank you so much for bringing this very important perspective that older women and women with disabilities have been left behind for a long time, and we need to put a very important focus on them. And sorry that we have very limited time today, so we'll skip the Q&A for this section, and we'll just wrap up with this section. And thank you so much for our three very, very experienced and great panelists for this section. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Ms. Spataru, and thank you so much for Ms. Hayashi. And now we will have the closing remark from Mr. Jeffrey Sachs, and he is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, and he is also the member of UN High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs and SDG advocate. So welcome, Mr. Jeffrey Sachs. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. What an incredible privilege it is to listen to all of your wisdom and discussion, and to have just a few minutes to close this very important discussion. I think it's absolutely clear that this pandemic has wrought great difficulties and inequities across our societies, not least to women across the world. I am serving as the chair of the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, which aims to bring recommendations to the UN agencies and to support the UN agencies and to the world's governments on better management of the crisis. I'm listening to governments all over the world and to civil society organizations around the world, and they're saying just what you're saying. The amount of hardship and violence against women, shockingly, is soaring around the world. And this will be one of the major messages that we give in the Lancet Commission when we issue our next report in January. I would like to ask you basically 3 points and ask for DESA to help on this in its wonderful way on 3 points. One is mobilizing data to the maximum extent possible on what we're seeing around the world. I have not seen comprehensive data pulled together on the violence against women, for example, but I hear it everywhere. And we need to mobilize as much as possible to dramatize this reality and to emphasize that it is not an isolated event, but it is a pattern worldwide. Second is the best practices. What we have heard today is a series of very powerful recommendations, and Anna Westmess's comments just now on the care economy as being central to this issue, and therefore a set of best practices around the care economy strike me as an extremely powerful bit of information that we need to carry forward. What can we do? Of course, part is what can we do in emergency response to the violence against women, in public understanding, in call centers, protection, mental health services, and many other kinds of ancillary services. But the care economy is a general proposition. Women care for the world, men ruin the world in too many ways. And that means caring for children, caring for elderly, holding families together, being in the front lines of the healthcare system almost everywhere in the world. The women are bearing a tremendous burden, and getting systematic advice on what are best practices to help women cope right now and to manage and to have a decent remuneration for their caregiving, I think is crucial. I'm intrigued to learn what Uruguay is doing. I'm intrigued to learn about the other best practices in Latin America. I noticed that in the chat room, there were also requests for this. But to the extent that I can be of any help in aggregating this information through this Lancet Commission and also in propagating this information, I think that it is essential. The third point is financing. All of these issues require some financing support for local services, for support to families, for support for childcare, for help with online education when schools are closed, and so on. And I would very much like to work with all of you and with DESA to identify the channels of financing that are most urgent and are most missing right now, to identify the financing gaps and to put them on the policy agenda. We have two big phases of work. We have at least another year of battling this pandemic, because even with the vaccines coming, this is going to be the battle of our lifetimes in 2021 to stop the spread, suppress the virus, extend the new vaccines that are coming into use, continue the best public health measures, learn from especially the countries of the Asia Pacific that have most effectively suppressed the pandemic to date. So one part of the time horizon is continuing to cope with this crisis during the coming year. And then, as we are all saying, and I think we can also take heart with the incoming Biden administration in the United States, which will join the rest of the world rather than fight it, building back better along the lines of sustainable development. And let's make sure that in that context, gender equality, SDG 5, and all of the rest of the sustainable development goals for decency of our lives, rule of law, social protection, health as well-being in general, are featured at the center of our recovery agenda. That's not just a matter of technical aggregate demand or stimulus or monetary policy. This is about building the societies that we are aiming for in the future and seeing the recovery as not a recovery to old practices, but as a path to sustainable development. So I'm very inspired and I really want to propagate the information that you have brought forward today. And I look forward to any way that I can be helpful in that effort. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for letting me share these brief remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you so much for closing remarks. And thank you all to our panelists today to joining us address the insights on gender equality. And thank you everyone for joining us through Zoom and through Facebook. And this event will be archived on the UN-DESA Facebook page. And you can rewatch it, share it just right after the event. And one note that on December 16, we will hold our next global policy dialogue on ensuring the food system livelihoods. And we will also welcome you to join if you are interested. And information will be made available on our UN-DESA website. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. And that's the end of our today's event. And please have a great day. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.